Let's talk about how one mayor's refusal to follow public records law could cost an entire city a fortune, and why this isn't just a legal slip-up, but a direct challenge to government transparency and accountability at the center of. This legal drama is a FOIA request, that's the Freedom of Information Act, and a former mayor who allegedly chose to ignore it. And now, both she and the village of Dalton are staring down a potentially expensive consequence. What's at stake? Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars, all because someone didn't hand over public documents. Now here's how this works. Step by step. FOIA laws exist to ensure that public agencies and the officials who run them operate in the light, not behind closed doors. Citizens have a legal right to request access to public records, emails, budgets, contracts, meeting minutes, disciplinary records, anything generated or used in the course of public business. Once that request is filed, the agency has a limited window to either comply or give a valid legal reason for refusal. There are exemptions, sure, things like personal privacy, national security, and active law enforcement investigations. But here's the thing, you have to explain why the exemption applies. You can't just ignore the request. And you definitely can't ignore the court once it becomes a lawsuit. In this case, Tiffany Henyard, who was the mayor of Dalton at the time, became the subject of a FOIA dispute. The records requested, still unclear to the public, but it was significant enough to spark litigation. Instead of complying, the response was silence. And that silence triggered a legal storm. She eventually showed up to court, but not physically. She logged in via Zoom. The judge wasn't impressed. In fact, the judge issued a very clear warning. Next time, show up in person. That alone tells you how serious the court is treating this case. But let's talk about the financial impact, because this is where it gets real. Once a FOIA lawsuit is filed and the public agency decides to comply after the fact, courts often award attorney fees to the person who filed the lawsuit. Why? Because the agency only complied under pressure. That means the government essentially has to pay for the legal fight they caused at the federal level. We've seen these attorney fees reach well over $100,000 in similar FOIA battles. Law firms charge upwards of $700 per hour. And while state courts like this one in Illinois generally involve lower fees, they still add up fast. Dalton is a small village. This could strain their entire budget if it goes the wrong way. Now, let's break down the liability. Who's responsible for paying these fees? On paper, it's the public agency, the village of Dalton. They're the ones who received the FOIA request. But here's where it gets murky. If the court finds that the official, in this case, Henyard, willfully and intentionally refused to comply, she could be held personally liable. That means the bill for all those legal fees might land directly in her lap. The argument would go like this. She wasn't just an employee. She was the mayor. She had control over the documents. And if she intentionally withheld them or blocked their release, that crosses into misconduct. There's also another layer of consequences. daily fines. Under Illinois FOIA law, if a court finds that an agency's failure to comply was deliberate, they can impose penalties of up to $1,000 per day per violation. That adds up quickly. Imagine a 90-day delay with 3 withheld records. That's a $270,000 penalty, just in fines. Now, some may argue, she's no longer in office. Why? Does this matter now? It matters because the consequences don't go away when someone leaves office. Government doesn't get a reset button. If Henyard's actions while in office led to a legal violation, the village still has to deal with the fallout. And if she's found personally responsible, that could mean lawsuits, sanctions, even disqualification from holding office again. Here's the reality most people don't talk about. FOIA is a transparency law, but it's also a legal tool. It allows the public to hold government officials accountable even when they try to hide behind bureaucracy. And when that tool is ignored, it triggers a chain reaction. Legal fees, public backlash, lawsuits, fines, and in some cases, criminal investigations if the noncompliance is extreme enough. If Henyard truly refused to release records that the public had a right to see, and if a judge finds she did it on purpose, she's not just walking away from a failed administration. She could be walking straight into personal legal liability. Now, the village of Dalton finds itself in a tough spot. On one hand, they're legally the entity responsible for FOIA compliance. But on the other, they're taxpayers, real people who could be forced to pay for the bad judgment of one former official. That's not just a financial issue. It's a moral and civic issue. Should taxpayers be punished for the actions of a mayor they no longer support? Or should she be held personally accountable, even after leaving office? That's the question the courts will have to answer. Meanwhile, this story continues to develop. The next hearing could determine whether or not Dalton is hit with fines or forced to settle massive attorney bills. And if that happens, we could be looking at a case study in how not to handle public records and how one person's refusal to follow the law can have consequences long after their political career ends. So the big question now, will the courts go after Henyard personally, or will Dalton's residents be left paying the price? Let me know what you think in the comments.